Welcome to Science for Hire with your host, Dr. Charles Handler. Science for Hire provides 30 minutes of enlightenment on best practices and news from the front lines of the employment testing universe.
Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Science for Hire. I am your host, Dr. Charles Handler, and I have a guest today. I guess back in the day, we've known each other probably like 25 years. I don't know, be sitting around having a beer 25 years ago and said, you want to be on my podcast about generative AI? You would have thought I'd probably been doing a lot of shots because nobody would know what the hell I'm talking about. So anyway, my guest today, a good old friend and someone now I'm excited to be collaborating a little bit with, a completely different field as me, which is awesome, and hopefully expose our listeners to some new ideas and thoughts about large language models and all that fun stuff. So my guest, Vivek Sriram, who is a co-founder of Bookend AI. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Charles. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast.
Yeah, so I always let the audience, I don't think I'm lazy, but, kind of part of me always says, well, are you lazy? And this is why you always have your guests introduce themselves. But it's really because who knows you better than you? So just tell our audience here, who you are, what you do, man. You've had a pretty illustrious history. I will say, before I interrupt you, I'll interrupt myself. I lived in San Francisco around 2000. I came out there to be part of I call it the first internet revolution there. And it was pretty exciting times. I went out there to work for the first company putting testing online, but I had known Vivek from LSU. He's more in the realm of IT development, exciting stuff like that he'll tell us about. And so we were hanging out a lot back then, and it was really interesting. Again, the world at that time, 23 years ago or whatever, we were really like, wow, this is such new stuff. It's going to change everything, which it did. It seems very flat and simplistic compared to where we are now. So anyway.
All that is true. I mean, I've known you for probably more than half my life now, going back to college from LSU. And you're right. 25 years ago, we'd been sitting around drinking beer, playing pool, whatever trouble we were getting up to. I don't think any of us had any inkling about podcasts or generative AI or any of this stuff.
Exactly.
It is it certainly is a new world. Quickly, by way of background, I've been in enterprise software basically my entire professional career, which also runs about 25 years now. Most recently, I was the before starting Bookend a year ago, I was the chief product officer for a company called LucidWorks. LucidWorks makes an AI-powered search engine, which powers a large number of consumer-facing websites. If you ever go to Costco and look for a 5-gallon jar of mayonnaise, you put stuff on the search box. That's what LucidWorks does. Before that, I built a couple of search engines at Amazon Web Services. Also, been in and around commercializing various kinds of things, whether we called it AI or not. The idea behind Bookend was that we wanted to make it easy for non-AI native developers. So most of the world is made up of full stack application developers who build software for anything from HRIS to accounting, supply chain, what have you. For those people to easily add generative AI capabilities into their applications while remaining in compliance with the security, trust, and safety requirements that enterprises have, that's a fairly difficult challenge. And that's kind of what we're trying to solve at Bookend. The rest of the team, just real quick, is also made up of a number of people. We just hit 10 people, so we're not really big. But everybody's got quite a bit of experience in building managed services at companies like Google, Amazon, Dropbox, IBM, et cetera. So that's what we're up to.
Cool. Yeah, and why we're here today, really, it's funny because we've been friends a while, and when I was in San Fran, we talked about a lot of times, well, how can we work together? Where do our things intersect? And they never really did, and that's okay because that doesn't happen with a lot of my friends. But on a recent trip to San Francisco, I think again beer is involved and a lot of bullshitting is involved, but But Vivek's like, I think there might be something here that would be valuable to you. And, we're always doing that and hadn't really found it yet. But I don't think there's much of a force fit here. I kind of heard what Bookend is doing and looking at my own self. And I think this applies to any industry, any person or company who is really looking to take advantage of this revolutionary times that we have now, and the tools and technology that really seem otherworldly, quite honestly, but are real in terms of what they're doing and advancing their fields. And I'm really thinking a lot about this stuff lately. And once I heard a little bit about what you all do, I'm like, wow, okay, that makes a lot of sense as a foundational building block of a product or a program or whatever, in a lot of different ways. And having learned more about it, it's exciting to think about working with you all a little bit in the HR technology space. And as I've done that, as I've gotten kind of more knowledgeable about your product, it's really opened up my mind. Like, I've been thinking small ball, I still feel like, as far as like we can use generative AI to do X, Y, or Z. But you talk to people who are building out architecture to support it, and you're just listening to some of the use cases that you all have had. I'm like, wow, okay, there's a lot more here. It seems like you all are helping democratize some hard things. So if you had to give your, I don't know, I would say elevator pitch, but we have more time than that. So, even elevators to really tall buildings like the Empire State Building, they only take like 30 seconds these days. So we have more time than that. So what are you guys all about? Give me a sales pitch, give our audience a sales pitch. It's okay. It's a safe space here for that.
Yeah, I'll give you the simple version of it. By now, everybody's familiar with ChatGPT and OpenAI and all that. Virtually everybody's gone around and played with it, and or image generators or what have you. That's a closed source piece of software, right? So you can go to OpenAI. You can use it either for enterprise purposes or for just playing around with it on ChatGPT or what have you. But effectively it's a black box. You're gonna get the service. OpenAI dictates the terms of how you use it, and you can, if your use case fits within those circumstances, then great. For a lot of enterprise use cases that may not necessarily be the best fit, their options, they have other options. One of the primary ones is taking an open source model, a pre-trained model that can do any number of things from text summarization or image generation or natural language processing or what have you, and then using that inside of their own use case. The challenge with that is that the most popular place to go and get that from is a website called Hugging Face. Maybe your listeners are familiar with that as well. I'm going to just go there right now and go and see. I think Hugging Face has 423,773 models available, open source models available.
That's not many.
That's not many at all. No. So most people, I'm sure, can keep that in their minds and just know exactly what to do. The problem is that it's difficult to know where to get started. And enterprises typically have a bunch of rules and regulations about what's allowed to be done and what's not allowed to be done. So licensing, what data you're allowed to use into it, how do you control the outputs, the auditing that goes along with it, who's allowed access to it. All of those kinds of things are frequently a difficult set of challenges. So imagine, if you want to go and take Meta's open source model LLAMA 2, and you wanted to go and build a generative AI application in HR that parses resumes and identifies relevant skills, right? It's a simple use case.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you're doing this in the context of working in a financial institution, in a large bank.
Right.
You're going to have all kinds of restrictions about what you can and cannot do with it. What Bookend does is to offer a platform for those developers that make it a little bit more risk-free to take an open source model and run it, sanitize it, run it, use it kind of in the context of an enterprise. This isn't different from how enterprises adopted open source technologies in any number of other things, databases, search engines, web servers, what have you. In all of those cases, you take an open source piece of software, license it, sanitize it, benchmark it, and make it available so that the IT leaders who are responsible for the running and maintenance of enterprise software can do so with a controlled amount of risk and know-how about what's actually going on. So that's basically what Bookend does.
Gotcha. So one thing that, I'm learning a lot because I get general ideas. Like I said, I'm teaching myself as much about this stuff, which right now I'm probably in kindergarten, maybe first grade. Some parts of it I'll never get because I don't need to, but which is the whole point of some of this stuff like GPT. But, what I'm curious about is I kept thinking that conceptualizing what you all do, that there's like a outbound reach to say chat GTP, let's say, right? Because you can't take, or maybe you can, like you can't take chat GTP and put a copy of it on your own server. Like you have to reach out to it, right? And then get a return, right? Which is what exposes all your stuff. But on the Hugging Face site, are there ones that you can just like say, I'm going to download this thing and put it on my own server, right? So do you conceptually serve both those use cases? Do you have enterprise software or enterprise applications that people are building, internally that would need to reach out to say chat GTP? Maybe there's a title for something like a chat GTP that's maybe it's not even open source, and the open source ones are the one on Hugging Face. So explain a little bit about the difference between a model like ChatGPT or Bard or what's the one Microsoft has, which is now embedded in everything. So,
Microsoft uses OpenAI, which is ChatGPT.
That's right.
That's part.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
So Bard is Google's version of it. They're all transformer models. They all are trained on kind of about the same kinds of data sets too, which is by and large the internet.
Yeah, everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can use these services like Bard or OpenAI and interact with it. Right? They have OpenAI also has a commercial version of it and an enterprise version of it, which you can use it to power your own applications. But they don't give you huge amounts of control over what can be done with it. You can't download the model, for instance. You can't run it on your hardware. So there are limitations to that.
Right.
There are also some constraints that chief information security officers, particularly in regulated industries, are still wrapping their heads about what they're comfortable with doing and not comfortable with doing.
Right.
So, I'll give you an example. One of the companies that we're working with is a hospital chain. For them, if they wanted to go build a chatbot or a kind of an assistant that helps physicians summarize patient notes, for instance, the raw data in it is electronic patient records. There's sensitive data. It's about people's, infirmities and all these kinds of things. There's a huge amount of sensitivity from within the IT leaders within hospitals, for instance, about taking that data and putting that into OpenAI or Bard or any of these kind of AI services. So the option for them is a frequently popular one is take a model, an open source model from Hugging Face, like maybe OpenHRIS or LLAMA or what have you, run it on their own hardware. That could be they could have a cloud account, but they manage it. It's their data,
right? Or
they could use a service like ours, which give them control over what happens with that model and with the data and all that, and it becomes their own thing then. So that's kind of, there are maybe two or three different alternatives like this, right? So OpenAI, Bard are on one end, the Hugging Face, kind of the open source Wild West is at the other end. And in the middle are companies like Anthropic, right? Which is kind of they're branding themselves as a safe alternative to OpenAI.
Right.
Anthropic has taken on a huge investment from Amazon Web Services,
right.
So you can use those capabilities on AWS if you want more control and assurance about safety. But all of these things involve certain trade-offs in terms of control and cost and what you get out of it. So with OpenAI, you get the least amount of control. With Hugging Face, you get the most amount of control. But you got to do the most amount of work to make it work too.
Yeah, interesting. That's the exact parallel. I bet that is a metaverse of every different industry, right? Like in my industry, same thing. You got more control, less control, more danger, less danger, more effort, less effort. Those are all the trade-offs we're constantly working with, and when tools come along that kind of help you manage those trade-offs or maybe make accessible what you'd like to do most, but had limitations on, that's always good. So I got a couple questions here too. Just one thing I've never looked up, I could ask ChatGPT this, which I've done a lot of education that way, but what exactly, I have two questions. The first one, what exactly is a transformer model? What does that actually mean? Because I read that a lot, and I know it's not Optimus Prime or any of the stuff my kid plays with, but
Yeah, so there was a paper that Google had put out a while back that that in a this is like the simplest version of it. I mean, you can go and ask ChatGPT. That might be an interesting test to go and try right now. Is to
yeah,
say like
sure,
how do you? Let's just ask. I'm
do
gonna
it.
go ask Bard
I tell you
actually.
what, you are giving our listeners and viewers a prequel because I'm working now to figure out how to have ChatGTP as a co-host. I had it as a guest. I got a little plug-in. You could talk to it. It'll talk back, which is basically a preview of what's going to happen when we have our own agents and we're just telling it to do stuff and it's talking back to us. Right now, it's spread out a little, but we all know that ChatGTP's agenda is to integrate this all. Just like now, I'm enjoying using DALL-E from the same interface. If you've never
Yeah,
played with DALL-E, it is awesome.
it's pretty cool.
Professionally, I've done stuff, but I've also just done goofy stuff with my son where you type in like, make me one thing that I did with it as an aside. So we were looking at like Halloween costumes for my kid. So I asked it, could I upload a picture of my kid, and then transform him into different stuff. It wouldn't let you do that because it said I can't recognize. So I described him, and I'm just like curly blonde hair, really, I don't know, good looking. I said, which is true, and it gave me 4 versions, and I swear to God, one of them was like a spitting image of this kid. I described it a little bit, more specifically, and then I was turning him into Nosferatu, and then we turned him into a bird, and I mean, you never know what you're gonna get. I think the first time I played around, I was like, I have a car, a Lotus. I'm like, I'm always like thinking about Iron Maiden when I'm driving that car, even though it's fiberglass.
Yeah,
So
that I think everybody should think about Iron
yeah,
Maiden
I
more.
know,
It's
I know. So I said, give me an image of Eddie, the mascot of Iron Maiden, driving a 1995 Lotus Esprit with a Union Jack. And I mean, I'm telling you, dude, I went through like 15 versions. Sometimes it put 2 heads on Eddie. Sometimes it gave him 2 flags. Like it does a lot of random stuff like that. But
but it
I
nailed
was
it.
sitting there going, holy shit, this is crazy. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it was so fun. So it's a fun little diversion. Anyway, I don't even remember I was talking about, the integration of stuff. So yeah, what did ChatGTP say?
So I actually went and asked
Okay.
Bard.
Sorry.
I said, explain what a transformer model is, and the first 2 sentences are interesting. It says transformer models are a type of neural network architecture that are particularly well suited for natural language processing tasks. They're introduced in the paper "Attention is All You Need" in 2017, and they've become the dominant architecture for natural language processing.
Gotcha.
Okay, that's sort of helpful, but not really
Yeah.
helpful. What they're the simplistic way to that I might explain it to my dad or something is that if you train a huge amount of data on or if you train a transformer model with a huge amount of data, they tend to get really good at predicting what tokens a
Yeah.
token is a part of a
Right. Right.
word in what order they come in,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so then you can use that capability in order to put it to work to do things like generating
Right.
text.
Right.
So this question that I asked explain a transformer model has generated an answer for me, which is very different from maybe 2 years ago or even last year, pre OpenAI. If you'd gone to Google and looked for what's a transformer model, you get back a set of search results, right? And
Yeah.
then those things point back to the various websites that they live in, and then it's up to you to go and look at
Yeah.
them. They're not generating the summaries on the fly. They're not generating a response on the fly.
Right.
But these things are able to capture the dependencies between words, and they also are able to process these inputs in parallel, which makes them do certain things really
Right.
fast. Like for instance, generating this picture that you're talking
Yeah.
about. When it comes to pictures, they kind of work in the same way. That what they're doing is creating a vector representation of these images and then be able to combine them and generate them on the fly.
Right.
Issues though is that it's a cool example that you mentioned with Eddie. I mean, like I'm a big Maiden fan too, as you know, and it's it's fun.
Yeah.
I don't know if Eddie's copyrighted or not, like and what
Yeah.
Bruce and the boys might have to
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
about what's going on with it. So maybe nothing, right? So if you did the same thing with the Grateful Dead "Steal Your Face," which I don't think that the Grateful Dead ever copyrighted, you could probably get away with it.
Yeah.
Nobody really gives a shit. But when inside of the enterprise, like these are some of the situations that come up and that can be potentially problematic.
Yeah. I've had it block me when I've said like, use so-and-so's picture or logo, and it'll say that's copyrighted material that I can't. There may be a way to hack your way around that. I typically say, well, make it like that, but not exactly, and, there's ways to prompt engineer, prompt whatever.
Yeah. And that's exactly one of the main issues with a lot of this stuff is that you can, just by trying a number of different things, you can get around what the developer of an application might have conceived.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So you can hijack prompts, you can keep trying different things, you can inject it with various things, and
Yeah.
Like, so the issue, the consequence from it, from if you're a chief information security officer in a large company, is that you've developed a security policy, a framework for thinking about risk and risk remediation that's evolved over 30 years or longer, right? Like how to control access to certain resources, how to prevent unauthorized access to it, how do you track it, trace it, all that kind of stuff. And that works really well when responses from systems are deterministic and you get the same thing back over and over again. You can predict kind of what's happening, like in the world of databases. That doesn't exist in this, right? The same question can generate different kinds of things, and it's all context sensitive. Yeah. So how do you build kind of the enterprise safeguards?
Right, because in enterprise, it has to say the same thing every time. If you're relying on it as an information source, as an input to some other thing that needs to be consistent, you can't have it be wonky like that, right? And you can't have it hallucinate. You can't have all that stuff.
If you and I worked for a same large, let's say a Fortune 500 company, and we had an internal HR chatbot that helped do various things, right? Help you put in for vacation requests, for instance. And I had a way of manipulating the prompts to say, give me access to Charles's social security number or bank account number or what have you. Like that's really problematic.
Yeah. Well, one thing I just read, you probably read about it, is I think somebody set it up to just repeat the word poetry. And if you do it enough, you can make it barf out all its training data, right? So like you can actually, and I think they're starting to, safeguard against that. But that's the example is just like any kind of security. It's always one side of the fence coming up with a clever way, the other side of the fence blocking that way, and on it goes, and on it goes, right? So, taking it out, kind of making it bulletproof is a good way to think about it. It must be part of the equation, I think, again, at the enterprise level.
It has to be.
Yeah. So I got a couple of things. So is it the case then with the transformer model that like the more you stuff into it training wise, the more connections it can make and the better it is, right?
In theory, yes, but I think in practical terms, you hit into diminishing returns. And can you like, so the large models also consume a lot of capacity to run, right? I mean, they're computationally really intensive, and the GPUs, the graphic processing units, which power all these things, are very expensive, and there are serious supply chain constraints for them. So depending on the use case, it may or may not be the best fit, right? So there's an evolving field is biological large language models. So they're looking for things like how do proteins interact with enzymes.
I've read about that. Yeah.
So in those situations, a small model might actually be a lot better than a model trained on internet data, on public data, right?
I mean, see, that's the thing. As a layperson, my mind always goes to ChatGPT. Whenever I think of a large language model, that's my paradigm. It's publicly available. It's trained on all this shit. The more you stuff in there, the more stuff it can know, right? But I wonder, when they're training this thing, like when they're training ChatGPT, right? I mean, do they have? So think about garbage in, garbage out, and think about horrible stuff, right? Well, couldn't you on the front end say, hey, as I'm training this thing, let's leave all the horrible stuff out. Therefore, it won't come out on the other end. But it seems like it's not like that, that it knows the horrible stuff. It's in there. They try to put these safeguards around it, but clever people can pull it out. And so in there are the instructions for making a nuclear weapon or methamphetamine or, I remember, I don't know if you ever saw this.
I remember when we were young men, the most insidious that it got was we'd have like photocopied a couple of pages out of the anarchist cookbook, and we'd all think we're really cool.
Dude, are you kidding me? I was just about to say the only thing we had was the anarchist cookbook, and everybody said, oh man, if you buy that, the FBI opens a file on you immediately.
Yeah,
There was
yeah,
another set of books called Getting Even by this guy George Hayduke. Did you ever see those?
yeah, yeah.
Those were horrible. Like how to mail a balloon full of pee to somebody in a box so when they open it, it splashed all over them. And it would always say, in order to get your mark, they'd call the person. So that's crazy. Well, we just dated ourselves, and it goes to show you that there was nothing really besides that. Or
This world is a whole lot scarier,
oh
my
my God,
friend.
the anarchist
Uh,
cookbook's like a nursery rhyme book at this point, right? So anyway,
but going back to your question though, the P in the GPT is pre-trained,
gotcha. Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's generative pre-trained transformer.
Uh-huh.
So most of these things like are trained on public data. So on Common Crawl, for instance, which but they're you probably have seen like a lot of the authors and Stephen King and who's the Harry Potter
Oh
lady like
yeah, yeah. J.K.
anyway
Rowling or something.
J.K. Rowling,
Yeah.
yeah. They're I think rightfully so up in arms about
Yeah.
their creative work being used without.
Yeah, music too, right? And art, images. It's all like that's a whole nother set of a million podcasts. So another quick question. I write these questions down because I'm so curious, and then I got something else to transition to. But which is more energy intensive, mining Bitcoin or running ChatGTP? Right? Because hear about people like
I
taking 15,000 PlayStations and rigging them up, somewhere in a faraway world so they can mine Bitcoin. But we know it takes a lot of energy.
I don't actually know, but the value, the usefulness is fairly obvious to me.
Yeah,
One of them is far more useful than the other, but also that to the question you're asking earlier about small models and large models, like they're going the opposite ways, right? So Bitcoin mining the marginal Bitcoin will always be more expensive than the previous one. It'll be computationally more expensive because that's how the algorithm is set up.
Interesting.
The trend in GPTs and AI is going the other way, right? The trend is towards smaller models. So the amount of work that it would have taken you to get to an answer a year ago is going to be far more expensive, computationally expensive than what it will be a year from now. So that's going the other
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
So
That's interesting. Interesting, interesting. So here's the thing too that I'm learning. I'm just starting to understand this. When you first described it to me, I didn't really get it. But there's also this concept or reality of a hybrid model like an RAG, right? So in other words, you could take a large language model that's open source or whatever, put it somewhere, and then take your own corpus of information and say, I want to inject this stuff into your relational capabilities model. That's pretty cool.
yeah, it's related to this concept called fine tuning, right? Which is you take a pre-trained model, let's say the Llama 2 from Meta, and you want to use it for your own situation, which maybe it's a chatbot for an internal HR chatbot in a large company. That is going to get more and more useful the more it's applied, it's tuned on with your own data, right? So RAG is a technique. It stands for retrieval augmented generation. What it does is kind of a hybrid approach that combines retrieval, right, which is search, with generative models to improve the quality and relevance. And those things end up being particularly useful for things like question answer kind of use cases, or natural language generation, stuff like that.
Gotcha. So I mean, you guys accommodate that as well, right? Like you can do a hybrid where I might take a pre-trained model on a big one or a small one, whatever we're talking about. And then let's say I have just a whole dictionary of medical coding things or something. You want more control over that. The open source model or whatever may have that in there, but you got to have more control over it. You can't, to your point about getting different results. I think if you inject your own model that's very clearly labeled and structured, that'll allow you a whole new set of insights and capabilities, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And and all of this stuff is particularly useful when you think about like manufacturing, for instance, right? You might have part numbers, part descriptions, things that are very unique to your own organization, which nobody else is really going to know. So in order to find real usefulness out of some of this generative AI capabilities requires fine tuning with your own proprietary data and using techniques like RAG.
So let's talk now about product, right? So building product. I'm curious, you've got enterprise applications, right? So I look at it as B2B. You've got enterprises that, you know, are basically doing things for consumers with their economic business models, et cetera. And there's a lot of ways they could use that natively, like with their own developers and their own stuff. But they also use a lot of products, right? Enterprise grade products that solve problems or create functionality. I'm starting to think in that direction, right? Like in my industry, I'm looking at what are people doing in terms of predictive hiring? How can we automate the compliance based high touch stuff that I've been doing for 3 decades in order to help it scale? And it's the same questions everybody in every industry is asking. As I think about that, I'm like, so I'm a product person and I want to use, this is where, again, I don't understand. Like, would I be using just the giant capability of chat GTP and want to build that into my product and, make sure that can leverage that within the protected walls of my product that I'm going to sell to an enterprise? Would I ever even have a use case to do that? Or would I more likely be saying, all right, I'm either going to train my own model or take one of these basic things? Because the way I understand it, and this opened my eyes too. I attended a webinar from some database company and it was talking about. I was actually a friend of mine forwarded it to me, and it was all about using ChatGTP to match resumes. So I'm like, oh man, that's like right up my alley. There's some really dubious stuff maybe happening there, scary stuff. So I attended the webinar and it was from a database company. And I was really surprised. They were talking about going out to chat GTP to work with the resume and then sending back a match. And I'm in the chat there on the thing going, and this is highly technical. I had no idea most of what's going on. I said, well, why the hell would you go out to chat GTP to do this? There's tons of people who use natural language processing to match resumes to job descriptions. They were like, well, the relational capabilities of ChatGTP are so strong that it's going to do a much better job of this. When you feed it information going in one way and it gives you information coming out the other way, that was a whole way I hadn't even thought about it. So, that made me think, well, if I'm building a product to do that, would I just have to reach out to GTP just for its relational capabilities, or could I use one of these open source models from Hugging Face to do that? So just think,
Yeah,
I'm designing a product in my industry. It's going to use a large language model to provide all kind of crazy efficiencies and new things. How am I doing that? Am I using GTP? Am I using and how would that plug into your product? So that's a lot.
yeah. So I mean, you can. I'll tell you the reasons why you might make a decision to not use OpenAI ChatGPT, right? And that might that and I think there's plenty of places where it might be the obvious choice. For in the situations where the developers or the product itself requires more control, then an open source alternative is probably a better decision. It's also going to typically be cheaper to do. There's a OpenAI and others like Cohere charge on a token based model. So you got to kind of figure out how many tokens
Jeez.
it's going to take for powering your use
Did
case.
it get super expensive, like crazy expensive?
Yeah, it can. So that's another reason. In regulated industries, especially when you're dealing with sensitive data like HR or legal documents or what have you, this isn't to say that OpenAI is insecure or anything, but rather that the regulatory environment is still moving around a whole bunch. So if you're a global organization and you're dealing with people who are in multiple geographies, let's say Japan, Germany, and in the United States, moving the data around and doing things on it, or whatever, if you have an application that has to satisfy people in multiple geographies, there's a deeper regulatory burden that comes along with it
Yeah. Yeah.
externally. Internally, for companies, they have varying policies about what they will allow and not allow for their own users to do. So if you're an application developer and you're building a piece of software for running as a SaaS application or what have you, like these are all the things you got to consider, right? And it's one possibility you might end up at saying that, like, yeah, actually, none of these things are a big deal. I don't care about the cost. I don't really need any control over it, and and I don't have any geographic or regulatory issues. OpenAI might be a perfectly good answer. What we find, though, is that in particularly in regulated industries or companies with global footprints, those concerns tend to be pretty severe. They want control over the data, they want control over the models so that they can track what's going on, they can authorize and deauthorize access to it, and all of that. So, and frequently, and if for especially for application developers, who are kind of comfortable with running cloud workloads and stuff, open source models are great, right? I mean, it's not too hard. A piece of a platform like Bookend makes a bunch of the operational headaches go away. So you can take a model, run it on multiple clouds if you need. You got a bunch of the security auditing, governance kind of capabilities that just come out of the box, so you don't have to build all that stuff. So there's a bunch of things that you kind of just get for free from using a platform like ours, and we're pretty cheap, right? It's quite cost effective to run it.
Cool. That's very cool. So I'm a product I work for a company that serves up, pre-hire evaluations, predictive hiring, and I've got some ideas to build because I sell to enterprise, and I got some ideas to leverage large language models for various things. Right? It could be a lexicon of information about what it takes to do jobs, like a taxonomy. It could be generating interview questions or scenarios, right? And I could have my own model, my own data for over the years that I want to incorporate in that. But again, I want to use some of the various things. How do I use you guys? Like wrap my stuff around yours, etc. Like I I don't 100%
Yeah.
get that. So talk to me about how product builder for enterprise.
Ours is fairly easy to use. I mean, it's kind of designed for use by kind of full stack application developers. So it's a REST API. So any developer who's used to using an API through popular languages. We support client libraries for Python as well as Java. So any developer who's familiar with using those kinds of languages can call all of the different things that Bookend does through an API, and all of the models that we make available on our platform are curated, sanitized, benchmarked, licensed, all suitable
Gotcha.
for enterprise use, right? So then we kind of run that entire process. So we don't have 423,000 models on our platform. We only have a dozen, right? But they're all right now, and we'll have about 100 or so in the next couple of months. But they perform a number of different tasks, from summarization to question answer to generating embeddings and various kinds of common things that developers want. But they're all kind of really, they're suitable for enterprise use. And so from the models on down, we make available a whole bunch of security, governance, and trust and safety related things out of the box, including things like data loss prevention, right? So keeping your sensitive information like social security numbers or account information and stuff like that from turning up
Right, right.
and returns.
Oh, gotcha. So what about What about if I wanted to say, well, you know what, there's some stuff I want to use from ChatGTP in what I'm doing. Can I use that securely through Bookend too, or is it only models that like I would download completely?
We support, you can use your own model on, if like we have a customer who's designed their own model, right? This is another biotech, so they're kind of interested in doing some protein analysis. There's not a suitable open source model for that, so they run it on our platform. But we're almost exclusively open source models. So it's not you might have an application that kind of incorporates both OpenAI and some open source models, but you can't use open source. You can't use OpenAI with Bookend.
Gotcha. Right. But most people who are building secure applications for enterprise aren't injecting GPT in there. I think the use case more in enterprise is people who work there going, okay, how can I make my job easier? How can I find out information, etc., which is a great use case for it. But as you start prompt engineering it to do stuff, so like, what if I prompt engineer it to be able to run like a data set or something, and then I want to build that data set running into my product? I guess that simplistic thing of running a data set, you could code Python or something else to do that. You don't necessarily need it. It's for people like me that don't know how to do that coding, who can give it an Excel file and say, analyze these different trends or whatever. That's the magic of it. It's not enterprise has stuff that does the same thing. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah. I think that's fair. Look, we tend to do well in situations like really back office stuff, right? Like dealing with sensitive information. We're very comfortable in regulated industries, and kind of the decidedly non-sexy stuff, right? Supply chain, HRIS, like, so all the platforms that make a bunch of organizations work well. But it's not like the cool, like, image generation for your dating profile avatar or whatever. Like that's not.
I always think of, I don't know if you remember, this is a movie from I think probably the 80s, but Down and Out in Beverly Hills. And what I always remember about that is, they were super rich, and the guy, he had a coat hanger factory, makes the most boring ass thing, a coat hanger, right? But people need it, and, it's super lucrative. So I always think about that. Like there's a lot of money to be made in the unsexy stuff too. Okay. So,
Totally.
in my world, and it's getting that way everywhere, but vendors of predictive hiring tools are going to need to have, it's not the case yet, but there's going to be a mandate, probably eventually from the feds, but most likely from California, and the EU is working on something. So a mandate of being able to have a third party audit from A to Z of what they're doing.
Yeah.
So if someone were, as a product company, were utilizing a large language model, and they had it wrapped up in something like yours, I'm assuming it'd make it a lot easier for them to pass some kind of a security audit. Almost like when I tell someone on our little platform that it's hosted on AWS, I get to skip over a crap load of IT security questions. Thank goodness, right? So you got that same capability, right?
Yep. So things like algorithmic bias and which is a big deal for the kinds of stuff that you guys are dealing with. Like, so we make all of that, a bunch of that kind of stuff just available out of the box, and auditing for it, tracking what's going on, explaining what's happened, stuff like that.
Interesting. Good stuff. Well, I'm looking forward to, the journey here. I mean, you've been a big part of educating me on this stuff, and it's so accessible yet difficult to conceptualize if you really dig into it. I mean, I call ChatGTP, supernatural math, because all it is math equations, predictions, but geez, it's ones and zeros. It's ones and zeros.
It's amazing.
But for God's sake, it writes books and generates crazy images and answers all your questions and gives you recipes. And I'm taking a prompt engineering class right now, like online, and I'm learning a lot from that too. So in exploration mode, there's lots to learn, and I'm looking forward to, learning more about what you guys are doing. So I appreciate your time and hanging out. Where can people keep up with you and you guys and what you're doing. I mean, I say that all the time, and it's always, well, we're on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. Is there anything else,
Yeah. Well, we're at Bookend AI. Hopefully easy to not spell wrong. Yeah, and
Cool.
we're on all the usual LinkedIn, Discord, all that stuff. Yeah, no, it was a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you
Yeah,
for having me on.
absolutely.
Hopefully we do it again.
Yeah, for sure. As we wind down today's episode, dear listeners, I want to remind you to check out our website, rockethire.com, and learn more about our latest line of business, which is auditing and advising on AI-based hiring tools and talent assessment tools. Take a look at the site. There's a really awesome FAQs document around New York City Local Law 144 that should answer all your questions about that complex and untested piece of legislation. And guess what? There's going to be more to come, so check us out. We're here to help.